Watched you.
Where you want?
That's where you came from.
Bix, Mick, what?
We accept.
Time.
Tomorrow?
After dark.
Place.
The park?
As you know.
Yes, well, see, I think they're wrong because it's like, you know, like the guy in Virginia, I mean, Wilder. He says, you know, I saw him on Evans and Novak, and they were saying, well, how do you feel as a black mayor? He said, I didn't run as a black mayor. You know, he said, because the majority of the electorate is white. He said, I ran as the best person for the job. And apparently that's what the electorate thought I was, and that's why they elected
And
me.
Wilder said the same thing in Virginia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about David Dinkins running for mayor of New York.
That's what Wilder said in Virginia.
And Wilder in Virginia said the same thing.
That's what Wilder said, yeah.
I think Dinkins said the same thing, too.
Yeah, you can't. Well, see, because the thing is, if you're an American, you should run on the basis of being able to represent other Americans. You know, you can't run as a black mayor or as a white mayor or as a Mexican mayor. I mean, Cisneros in San Antonio, fucking guy.
Yeah.
You know, and he spoke to some of the people in Spanish and some of the people in English. But he ran as the best mayor for San Antonio, and he probably was.
Yeah. What about Farrakhan? What do you think of him?
What do I think about him?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think there's a lot to think about him. I mean, he's a fascist, I would say. He's a racist. I mean, what I never understand with you all is why you all never ask him what it seems to me is the simplest question to open an interview with, which is, Mr. Farrakhan, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, your predecessor and your mentor, taught his followers of the Nation of Islam that the white race was a race of devils grafted by a mad scientist named Yaqub 6,000 years ago. Do you believe this? I'm pretty sure he would say yes. And I think that would that would make the rest of the interview very clear.
Where were you when I was preparing my interview? What about Jesse Jackson?
Well, I think Jesse Jackson is a man who has a great deal of potential to do a number of good things. I mean, I'm not always thrilled by the choices that he makes. I don't think that his association with Farrakhan was a good one. I don't think that what appears to be a myth that he's created about himself of having been there when King was killed.
Let me take a break. Stanley Crotch is here, and we'll talk more provocative and interesting ideas about the black cultural experience, African-American experience in the United States, where it is, where's the leadership, where is it going. We'll pick up on some of those themes. We are back with Stanley Crotch. Let me just raise one point about Farrakhan, which is interesting about him. Somebody's listening. The idea of this conspiracy that he seems to be party to, that he talks about in his speeches, people are listening to him. And it seems to me it behoves us to hear him and talk to him because there's an audience out there that seems to be listening. Now, who is that audience and why are they listening to the Reverend Farrakhan?
Well, in my book, I have an essay about Farrakhan called The Nationalism of Fools, and it describes him in performance. And I would suggest that people go to hear him not because they necessarily believe what he says, but because he's a thorn, a spear, an irritant to the purported white power structure.
Yeah.
You know, people like to go hear him call white people names. But, I mean, you see women in tight pants and short dresses with a lot of lipstick on and wigs and all this. At these rallies, they're not going to go into the Nation of Islam because they'd have to take off those tight pants and wear longer dresses and take off the lipstick and all that business. I mean, they're there because it's what I call political rock and roll. It's there because it's liked because it irritates somebody else. You know the thing that they say about the kid who gets the electric guitar and turns it up to 10 just so he can drive his mother and father crazy.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I think that's the same thing that people go to hear Farrakhan for. They go to hear him make the white people mad.
And maybe because they're suffering a little bit and there's some pain in their life and therefore it's somewhat of a salve to hear that?
Yeah, and well, it's also easy because, I mean, he pins all of the evil on the white people. I mean, his thing is the reason you're messed up
Right.
is because of them. They brought you over here. They made you like this. And the solution is to get away from them.
And if you were following him, making your own speech, what would you say to those people who are members of the underclass who are black Americans?
What would I say if I came up? If I came up
and who are saying to you, we can't make life work. It's not, America's not working for us.
Well, I'd say one of the things that has to be done is that people have to, again, engage their faiths and begin what is the real problem of working in a democracy if you represent a so-called special interest group. What you have to do is you have to make your problems seem to be, which is what they truly are, American problems. You see, it was a very interesting thing, for instance, that happened when the Tawana Brawley fraud initially seemed as though it was a real case. Mario Cuomo said at a press conference early on, he said, I feel as though Tawana Brawley is my daughter. I feel as though she is all of our daughters.
Before we do this, let's explain who Tawana Brawley is, because it's an interesting point you want to make, and I want to explain to you. She was the young woman in New York who said that she had been...
that she had been kidnapped and held in the woods and raped and sodomized for 2 or 3 days.
And then stuffed in a garbage can.
Yeah, by a group of white men. A few of them police officers.
Right.
And she was immediately surrounded by those racial political ambulance chasers, Al Sharpton, Alton Maddox, and Vernon Mason.
The Reverend Sharpton and the attorneys Madison and Maddox.
Right.
Mason and
Maddox, right. And so early on, that was when it really looked as though something had happened to her, in the way that she had described it. Cuomo said that he felt that she was his daughter, and that she was all of our daughters. And to me, that is the real point of political engagement. You know, is that you make problems, make it clear to people that that all problems of Americans are American problems. They're not the problems of Jews, nor the problems of Hispanics, nor the problems of so-called poor whites, nor the problems of the so-called underclass, etc. That they are American problems, and that it is the job of Americans to get those problems eradicated.
Why do people like Sharpton and Maddox respond so differently?
Why do they respond? Well, I mean, there's a constituency that has developed based upon conspiracy theories that are...
I mean, do they believe what they say they believe, or are they using it?
Well, you know, I couldn't really sit here and say whether they absolutely believe what they say, but I mean,
did they believe Tawana Brawley in the beginning? I mean,
I think they may have.
Yeah.
But you see, but as Jerry Nachman, who's the editor now of the New York Post, pointed out, initially they demanded that Robert Abrams, the state attorney
resign.
No, they initially demanded that he try the case himself.
Right.
And that they wouldn't have a case unless he tried it. He tried it himself. When he agreed to do it, then they said that he wasn't qualified to try a case. And so that was the point at which it began to seem as though there was something strange. Also, Bill Cosby and Ed Lewis had offered $30,000 to anyone who would come forward with any information leading to the arrest and the conviction of the purported felons. And no one ever came forward. And this is from a little small town where people need money.
How much racism exists in America today?
I think a lot of it exists, but I don't think it's. But I think it's pretty democratized now. You know, I don't think that. I think that you have racism coming from almost every group in the United States now, and that all of these groups have people who present their racism not as really racism, but as just an accurate analysis of the way things are. You know, and I think that people like Gus Savage, for instance, should be attacked first by black people. I mean, in other words, so you can't keep telling white people that you have to separate. You know, I say that in the introduction of my book.
Right.
You can't keep telling white people to separate themselves from the racists and hysterics in their midst, and then refuse to do it when you see racists and hysterics rise up in your own ranks. You know, that's what
John Lewis was, I may be on soft ground here, but I think John Lewis was the only member of the Black Caucus to separate himself.
Well, yeah, John Lewis has always been like that.
Because he's a top, honest guy.
Yeah, because John Lewis knows what the deal is. See, he will not knuckle under to some anti-Semite or some black racist because this person seems to have a constituency, you know. I mean, it's like the fact that Savage's opponent said that what Savage had done, and this is something that I think a lot of people missed, was he said he's taken a page from redneck politics. I think the guy's name is Reynolds. He said, Julian Bond told me once that the way white guys used to get elected in the South was they'd get all the white people in a room and whoever hollered nigger the loudest would get the job. He said, now Savage wants to get all the black people in the room and whoever hollers honky the loudest will get the job.
Yeah.
You know, and what I mean is that it's the job, it seems to me, of black writers and so-called intellectuals and political leaders to assault that dragon.
Yeah.
Whatever color that dragon is.
But I don't get the impression that's taking place. I mean, you may be one voice out there, but I don't hear a lot of voices there. I mean, there is almost a sense, and it's true in other movements, there is a reticence because you see a lot of enemies out there, and there's a kind of internal intimidation to do that because you think, look, you know, we've got enough enemies on the outside for us to be attacking each other on the inside, right?
Well,
that's the idea that exists. It existed in the feminist movement.
Well, that's true, but you see, but there are people who are standing up, though. I mean, for instance...
Well, John Lewis and you and...
Well, I mean, there was a guy in New York, Playthell Benjamin. He wrote a searing analysis of all of the problems that were taking place in the Tawana Brawley case and really pulled the covers off of Mason, Maddox, and Sharpton. I mean, it was very, very clearly. It's a black guy, considers himself a radical. I mean, there's Charles Johnson. I mean, there's David Nicholson here at the Washington Post. There's Juan Williams.
Right.
I mean, there are a lot of people who will not submit to this nonsense, truly.
All right, let me take a break. We'll be back. Stanley Crouch is here, and we'll talk more. What difference does it make that Colin Powell is chairman of the Joint Chiefs?
What difference does it make?
Yeah. Does it mean something?
I think it means a lot, as I said earlier. I mean, you win wars by winning battles. And every time an Afro-American or a woman or an Hispanic or anybody who comes from a group that has a record of being excluded from positions of responsible power comes to a position of power, the democracy is the power of the democracy is intensified and the dreams of the people in that group are extended. And that's the victory. You know, I mean, it's like I heard the thing on the radio this morning. A guy was talking about Sarah Vaughan.
Right.
And the guy said that one of the teachers at the school she went to in Newark said that what she did made it possible for every child who goes to that school to believe that he or she can become number one. You know, that it's possible. I mean, here's a three-dimensional example of someone who's achieved it.
And so that Powell says that, and Cosby says that, and Michael Jackson says that, and Michael Jordan says that, and Dave Stewart says that, but you know, my black friends always say to me, don't talk about sports and entertainment figures all the time. Talk about people, you know, of learning. Talk about educators and talk about people in medicine and science and the military and places like that. Because that's where in education, that's where the victories need to be won. That's where we need the role models.
Yeah, but I mean, but those people are there. They just don't get the same attention. They don't get the same attention because you can't sell as many you can't sell as many scalpels as you can Michael Jordan, Air Jordans.
Right.
So I mean, if there was a market for scalpels, they'd find all these great black doctors. They'd have them on the news with some Spike Lee lookalike trying to talk to him about what he's doing with his scalpel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
What do you think of Spike Lee?
Well, I think he's a talented young man.
Yeah.
I don't think he has great insight into anything much.
What about Do the Right Thing?
Well, I thought that was
the movie.
I thought that was an inflammatory cartoon. Personally, I think and have said, and I say so in my book, had that movie been made by Danny Aiello,
yeah,
the very, very same movie, not one.
Danny Aiello was in the movie.
I think black people and white people would have been all over Danny Aiello with meat hooks.
Yeah, saying you racist.
Yeah, they wouldn't have accepted those images from a white director, you know. I mean, see, like, I come from the so-called black lower class. My mother was a domestic worker. She worked 6 days a week, $11 a day, reared 3 kids, etc. See, I've never been in a poor community where there were no black people who had any jobs. I've never seen that.
Every black community there, I got you.
I've never seen that.
In every black community you've ever been in, there are people with jobs.
There are people who get up and go to work. Now, they may not want to go to work where they're working, like you probably don't want to come here some days, you know, but they get up.
No, every day.
Well, those, unlike you, who may not want to go every day,
That's right.
you know, But
They don't even have to pay me. I'm here.
right. But they get up and they go to work, and they rear their kids the best that they can, and they do
Yeah.
the best job they can do. And I think that although a lot of people say dismissed coming to America, I think
Yeah.
you got a much richer picture
Yeah.
of what black communities really are like from coming to America, where you had everybody from the do-nothings to the people who are entrepreneurs.
What about Michael Jackson?
What do you mean?
Well, just tell me about him. I mean, you write about him. You got a whole chapter on him.
Well, I have a section in there where I attack the idea that his
Cosmetic surgery and
his
all that.
cosmetic surgery is reflective of self-hatred. See, I submit that those people who want to talk about African backgrounds, and all of that business, that Africans, there are many examples of Africans doing what I guess within the context of their cultures would be called cosmetic surgery, with the extending of the lips, the neck, the earlobes, all these scarification, all that kind of business. Further, I go on to say that if a black guy or a black woman were to invent a painless and absolutely safe tanning process for white people, he or she would make more money than Bill Cosby.
You better believe it. I'm here to tell you that I'd be an investor.
know.
I know that would make it.
And I also would say that all the white people who go get cosmetic surgery, who've made millions of dollars for these cosmetic surgeons, are never accused of suffering from self-hatred.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, all those guys that...
Well, some people do. I mean, some people say, that they really do, and they've got this, they have an image, a media image that they develop from television and from movies, that what the ideal woman ought to look like, and therefore they're trying to appear that way, and so therefore cosmetic surgery is an effort to say, I don't like the way I am, and I want to be like this other person who they've been presented an idealized version of.
Oh, yeah, but what I'm saying, though, is that when somebody looks at somebody, for instance, like Cher, who was supposed to have gotten a lot of cosmetic surgery.
Right.
I haven't seen any lengthy treatises about
her guilt.
About her racial self-hatred. That's why she's gone beneath the knife so many times.
Yeah. Why do you think she's gone beneath the knife so many times?
Well, I think it's because the whole glamour business is based on making women feel insecure.
Yeah, that's my point. Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that's an American phenomenon.
No, it's not. It's not American. Come on.
You don't think it's American?
No, go to Brazil.
You think, well, it's a worldwide phenomenon.
Yes.
I guess it's an international. You think it's an international conspiracy?
Yeah, no, I think you'll find a lot of women who've had cosmetic surgery in Europe as well.
Yeah.
Of course you will.
No, what I mean in terms of a guy like Michael Jackson is that what he's doing or has chosen to do is something that should be looked at within the entire context of what we're discussing.
Yeah, let me just leave you for a second. I want to come back for another segment, but I'll do it. We'll talk about Michael Jackson when we get back, a little bit more as to why he's done whatever he's done via cosmetic surgery. Stay with us. Essays and reviews from 1979 to 1989. I should say about Stanley, he is also writing a biography of Charlie Parker, which is out in 1991.
It should be in 92, I imagine, because it's due in the spring of 91.
What you mean? It'll be on the newsstands it'll be on the bookstores in 92?
Yeah, it usually takes about a year after you turn a manuscript in for a book to
Now,
come
what
out.
are you saying about Parker? I'll come back to Michael Jackson in a moment. What are you saying about Parker that hasn't been said? What's new? What's interesting?
Well, I think we'll get a much richer period of a picture of his life.
Yeah.
We'll get a much richer picture of the world out of which he came, and we'll get a real sense of how a handful of people can bring about an enormous change in an art form,
And Parker, and who else would you put in that?
Well, Parker, Dizzy Gillespie,
Right.
Max Roach, Kenny Clark, Oscar Pettiford, Bud Powell, those people. I mean, see, there was a period in the 1940s when there were only about 6 or 7 people who could play that style that Charlie Parker became famous for. By the end of the 40s, there were hundreds trying to play it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a metaphor for what we were talking about earlier. You see, once you realize that a handful of people could bring about this stylistic revolution, quote unquote, that Charlie Parker and the bebop generation brought about, then it's easy to see how that applies to many other things, And I think that part of the problem that we have in the country now is that so many people who are supposedly from the bottom are told over and over that, you know, they're not going to let you do it. You can't get there. There are too many obstacles. It's not fair. I mean, you know, people are being reared to be, you know, panty waists. You know, that's not good. And the thing is...
Reared to be what?
Panty waists. You know, people, like, you know, they hold on to their mothers' dresses, you know,
Gotcha.
and whiners.
Yeah, right.
You know, and the thing to me is I look at it like this. See, like, whatever problems you or I have or anybody in the studio has, anybody in Washington has.
Yeah.
The problems that Frederick Douglass had,
Right.
what he had to deal with, and what he did not crumble before that he was... I mean, when you look at men like Frederick Douglass,
the great abolitionist.
yeah, you look at a guy like him, I mean, you know, me writing some article that a lot of people are not going to agree with, I mean, that's minor in terms of the kind of problems that he had. He had to get off the plantation first, which he did. You know, he went on to become one of the great speakers. In fact, when Lincoln met him, I think it was in 1864, 63, 64, Lincoln told his secretary that given this man's point of social origin, he's probably the most meritorious American in the entire country. You know, and what I mean is that those are the kind of people that I think people have to know they come from. You know, that they're connected to that kind of engagement, that kind of endeavor. You know, and that they themselves can do that. You may not become a Frederick Douglass, but you at least could get through public school.
But then that raises the interesting question as to whether this society, our society, has done enough to point the way and to point out the connection, whether the establishment in America and people who run our schools and who have influence over what our children learn and what they are taught have done enough to explain who Frederick Douglass is and explain that connection.
Well, I mean, there can be an argument for that, but we also have to, I mean, you know, there's a big fraudulent argument going on in New York now about the fact that if the public school books are changed, then fewer black and Hispanic kids will drop out of school because they'll know that they came from somewhere, right? Well, the only problem I have with that argument is that suggests that if you had taught Lucky Luciano about the Italian Renaissance when he was 10, he wouldn't have gone on to become a gangster.
You think he would have been a painter?
Yeah, right, or he'd have said, oh, I come from a great line of Italians, I can't go into prostitution.
But you're the one that just said you need to know that Frederick Douglass was there.
No, that's not what I'm saying. See, I used him as an example, but I think that I think that people like Douglass, of course, should appear in American history.
And Paul Robeson and the rest of them.
Or whomever.
Right.
The issue I'm raising is, and I raise it in my book over and over, is that, see, people have won, oftentimes. They've taken this dragon on, and they have taken ground.
The dragon is racism?
The dragon is racism, the dragon is xenophobia.
Obstacles, the xenophobia, everything.
All of that.
People can overcome.
And are overcoming at this very moment.
Yeah.
But the problem, you see, is that if you don't understand what the country needs in order for its democracy to function, such as a first-class public school system, you know, then you can end up with people graduating from schools who are either illiterate or borderline illiterates, you know. And it seems to me that one of the major things that has taken place in the United States over the last 25 years is that we have let what were formerly very, very good public schools decay. And you can't ask of an impoverished community that it engage its fate if it doesn't have the tools to go out here and fight.
Should Jesse Jackson be president?
Well, I tell you, I think Jesse Jackson is much like Huey Long. I think he has a lot of good intentions, and I think he has a lot of great gifts, and I think he has a very broad demagogic stripe down his back. And I would not really vote for him to be president unless he showed to me that demagogic stripe had shrunk enormously or perhaps had been washed away.
Yeah, but a demagogic stripe is not a unique attribute or a unique characteristic of Jesse Jackson. Other politicians have that. You're just saying that his is broader than everybody else.
Well, I mean, would you vote for a guy who you thought had demagogic qualities just because he said some nice things? It's hard
to imagine that nowadays there are actually parents who teach their children that maybe it's wrong to be